Traveling around the world, being paid to do what you love as a performer is without a doubt one of the greatest privileges that you can have. Not a day goes by where I'm not extremely grateful for the chance to be able to tour and play drums as my career. Having said that though, being on tour can be an extremely challenging and difficult environment to work in, especially over a long period of time. Today I want to share with you the top 5 things that I've found to be the most challenging about being on tour, especially over an extended period of time. If you are ever fortunate enough to be heading out on the road, I hope that having some knowledge of these things will help to better prepare you to enjoy the experience to the absolute fullest. Let's get into it. What's up everyone? Welcome to Drummer's Perspective. My name is Ben Todd and I'm here to help broaden your scope of what's possible as a drummer. Thanks so much for checking out the video today, whether you're watching here on YouTube or you're listening on the podcast. I really do appreciate you wherever you're coming in from. If you are watching here on YouTube though, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, that definitely does help me out. Now today I want to discuss something that's been a reality for me for pretty much the last 14 years, and that's the effects of long-term touring. Now, a lot of the points I'm going to talk about today are things that on the surface should be pretty obvious about heading out on tour. But the thing that really magnifies their impact is the duration that you're sometimes expected to put up with them for. If you're heading out on tour for a week or a month, say, that's one thing. But the points that I'm going to talk about are things that would affect a gig like a musical theater gig, a cruise ship gig, or what I'm currently doing of a circus gig where we're literally signing contracts that go for years at a time. If you're not aware of some of the points that I'm going to be talking about, you can end up numbing yourself to a lot of feelings that should be, in a normal life considered very important. So I hope this video is informative and educational and most of all helps you have a little bit more fun if you are ever fortunate enough to be heading out on tour for a long period of time. So the first challenging point that I want to talk about today is something that I probably get asked the most about, and that's playing the same music every day. How do you play the same music every day? How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it interesting? Don't you get bored? It's a real thing. Yeah, playing the same music every day can be extremely challenging and frustrating at some point. Now, I'll be doing an entire video about some concepts and techniques and approaches that I've developed over my time to keep the same music interesting on a daily basis. But all I'll say for now is that even if you're, at the beginning of your rehearsal process with a tour that you know is going to go for a long period of time and you absolutely love the songs, you just can't get enough of them, at some point throughout that tour, there's going to be a point where you're just going to want to play absolutely anything else but those songs. So that's where, being a professional musician kind of kicks in, and remembering that what you're doing is, an extremely fortunate position to be in, being paid to play music and play your instrument out on the road. It's a super incredible thing. So that's something to just kind of always keep in the back of your mind, even as I go through this video, all the other points that I'm going to discuss. It's a super special thing. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm very, very grateful to have the job that I do. But I'm human. Everyone who has this kind of gig is human. There's going to be a point at some point along the tour that you're just going to get really frustrated. So it's really important to remember that you have to consciously try and find ways to keep the music interesting, stimulating, and challenging. Now, as I said before, I'm going to be doing an entire video about this in a little bit, but these can be both, different mental approaches and different playing approaches. There are definitely subtle things that you can do that from an audience perspective, no one would even know. But from a player's perspective, it can feel like a completely different show and completely different music if they're done the right way. So please, as I said before, subscribe to the channel and you'll get a notification about when that video is coming out, because there's going to be some really informative and interesting points in that. Now, the other thing about this kind of gig that I'm doing specifically, similar to a musical theater gig, I would say, is that although it's the same music every day, that's one thing, but an element that also magnifies that feeling of kind of monotony sometimes is the environment itself doesn't change either. It's the same drum booth, it's the same stage, it's the same, layout of musicians. Everything can get very samey. Unlike a pop touring gig where, yes, you're probably playing the same music every day, but you could potentially be changing venues night to night. And now that's something that could help, change up your mental state of how you approach the music. Even though it is the same songs, you could be in a slightly different headspace depending on the kind of venue you're playing. So yeah, for me in this current gig, which is the same environment, it's really, really easy to fall into the trap of just making everything else in your life very routine to kind of fit that mold. Routine can be great. I love routine. I love, knowing, when I'm going to exercise, when I'm going to eat, when I'm going to go to work. That stuff can be really comforting, but also it can really magnify that feeling of playing the same music every day. It can make the whole thing, your whole day, your whole week and month just feel very, cookie cutter Groundhog Day. Some things that I've done in the past and I continue to do is just try and change up your daily routine. That can really have a big effect on your mental state and therefore how you play that same music of the show. For me, this can be things like sightseeing in whatever city we're in, or doing other musical activities, composing, writing videos like this, hanging out with friends, getting coffee, that kind of stuff, just to try and, change up that daily routine, as I said, can help really change your mental state of how you approach playing the show. The flip side of that, though, is when you go too far the other way and you just go crazy seeing a bunch of stuff during the day and trying to squeeze in a whole bunch of things before you get to the show. I know from personal experience, there's been times where I know I've done too much, and by the time I actually get to the show, you're exhausted, you're tired, and that's not cool, because being out on the road to play music, as I said in the beginning, it's an extremely fortunate and privileged position to be in. And you have to remember always that should be the priority. You should be doing, yes, other things during the day to change up the routine and keep things interesting, but you never want to be sacrificing how much you can give to the show and to the music and to the performance or the artist you're playing with, because that really, really is the priority about being out on tour. All the extra stuff that comes with it is great, but you just have to remember that the real reason you're out on tour is just to be able to give your best and play your best every single day. So it's a constant balance. For me, I've been doing this, as I said, for about 14 years, and there are still days where I think, I've done too much and I'm exhausted and I need to reset a little bit. But then there are other times when I feel myself getting into too much of a routine of keeping things too consistent, and that's not great either. So it's just it's a balance, and it takes a long time, and there is no formula. But the main thing to remember is to just be conscious of it and just be aware and just know that, yes, playing the same music every day, try and really understand what that means before you accept a long-term touring gig. Because I have plenty of friends and other musicians that I know who say, yeah, I really want to go out on tour. I'd love to do something that you do. And I know from their other playing interests and what they actually do most of the time, that they would really struggle with this kind of thing, because it definitely takes, a certain type of musical personality to find playing the same music every day interesting and challenging. And you have to just try and really understand what that means as a real daily, reality before you end up accepting a gig like this, potentially just for, the paycheck or for the status or for where you'd end up going on the tour. Now, the second point that I want to discuss is something that really was a big shock to me when I came on tour. I realized that it just was something I didn't even consider or think about until I actually got out on the road and realized just how difficult it can be to practice. As drummers, we don't have the luxury of being able to take our instrument, like a guitar or bass or keyboard, back to our room and spend time practicing and shedding. Like, we really need access to our instrument and not be in a position where we know we're disturbing people, and that can be really, really hard to find situations like that when you're out on the road. Now, a big thing too is that if you're leading up to, a big tour, maybe you're practicing every day, you're working on the music for the tour, and then you actually get out on the road and that routine is just completely gone out the window, and you realize pretty quickly that a lot of the time, the only opportunity you get to play is the actual show. You might get a sound check or a line check, but that time can be really, really minimal. So if you're frustrated about, potentially playing the same music every day, and then you realize that that is actually the only music that you get to play every day, it can really affect your long-term enjoyment of the gig itself. Now, it's really important that you try and find ways to continue to get better and develop away from the drums, away from your actual, the drum set that you have on stage, perhaps. A lot of times when you're out on the road, you don't have the luxury of having a completely separate drum set that you can go and play, whenever you want and not disturb anyone. So for me, I've found that I just really needed to get better at like feeling like I can progress just on a practice pad, or feeling like I can progress just on a small electronic drum kit that I had with me on tour. Before I came out on the road, I was just used to being able to go out into my practice room whenever at home and play as long as I wanted, and know that I wasn't going to just disturb anybody. But as soon as I came out and I realized, like, oh my goodness, like, I can't play at all. I can't play. Someone's going to say it's too loud. Someone's going to say, can you find another space to take your equipment to and do it there? But it's just not a reality a lot of the times, especially if you're on, a pop touring gig where you're just changing venues every night. It can be a real struggle. Now, if you're someone who loves to practice and loves to have their routine of that, then it's just important to realize that before you come out on, on the road on a long-term touring gig, that isn't really an option. So being aware of it is one thing, and then just, putting things in place before you come out on the road so that shock is not as sudden, and you don't feel like, all this frustration and bad energy that you can't continue to get better when you're out on the road. Because there are certainly ways that you can practice and develop away from the drums. As mentioned, for me, it was trying to, just get better at working on a practice pad and feeling progression that way. But there are other ways too, like I feel like I can practice and develop creatively through writing music and through, collaborating with people online on other projects. Yes, it's not actually getting time to woodshed on the drums, but just for me, I came to a point where I accepted the fact that I'm not going to be able to practice as much as I necessarily want to, so I have to find other avenues to fulfill that desire to continue to get better. So yeah, as mentioned, for me, it's practice pad, it's working on new music, it's collaborating with people, it's, writing these kind of videos, it's watching drum videos too, and, that kind of thing can be really beneficial to you as well. And just to feel like you're learning all the time, that's a big thing. So yeah, just being aware of the fact that being out on the road can be extremely difficult to practice. So if you are heading out, just try and put things in place before you get on the road and realize just how much of a reality check that can be. The third point I want to talk about is something that's not really related to playing or the music side of touring at all, but it's on a personal level, and that's how important it is to consciously make an effort to maintain relationships with people back at home, both on a personal level and a professional level. Because the reality is, if you're out on tour for a long period of time, people will forget about you. Even some of your closest friends and closest musical colleagues who you think, have a really, tight relationship with, and you can't imagine, any kind of deterioration of that. If you're not in front of people's faces sometimes, just, personality wise, they can forget about you, and that's okay. It's one of those things that, as I said, on the surface, like on, going out on tour, yeah, you're not going to be around people. You're not going to be in situations where you're getting to play with people or socialize with friends. So it's natural for people to sometimes forget that you're around, or forget that you can speak to them. Even with FaceTime and email and messages, there are certainly people, in my network that have a really hard time of understanding that still, and they don't know how to sustain a relationship when you're not necessarily in the same city. So that's okay. I mean, it goes both ways. You have to make an effort, but they also have to be understanding of your situation. And yeah, for me, there's certainly been people who I've really tried to make an effort to sustain a relationship with back home, but they don't understand, and they don't know how to reciprocate with how to interact with me when I'm out on the road. So, but some people you get back to seeing after not seeing them for 3, 4, 5 years, and it's like nothing ever happened. you just go back to your normal ways of interacting and socializing, and your friendship level is kind of where it left off, which can be great too. But if you are going to head out for a long period of time, it's just important to think that there may be some people who don't know how to sustain a relationship with you when you're out on the road, and that it might, not be what it was once, but that's okay. And that's just one of the things about touring long term. There's pros and cons like anything. So, for me on a personal level, I really try and consciously interact and communicate with all of my family and friends as much as possible. And, of course, these days it's so easy to do that through social networking and FaceTime and all that kind of stuff. But as I said, some people still, with all of that, they find it challenging and they don't know how to communicate and sustain that relationship. So it's just about, for you doing as much as you can to sustain the relationships that you want to continue on once you get back off of tour. Now, on a professional level, that's a different thing. That's why I do really think that if you are going to be out and away from your musical community for a long period of time, it's very important to have some kind of online presence. Now, it doesn't have to be, flashy YouTube videos and chop busting stuff all the time, but just something, whether it's a website or, a simple Facebook page that you can, share what you're doing, just share photos and videos, and little playing clips are great, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just something to remind people that you exist and you are still a living, breathing human. You're just not in that scene that you once were. You're out on the road. But it is important to do that, because if you just head out on tour and stop communicating with everyone back home, a lot of people can literally forget that you exist. Especially for me, it's been a long time now. It's been, like I said, close to 14 years of being away. Now, I have been back and forth home, numerous times in that period, which does definitely help. But that's another thing, that if you do, get to go home in these long tours, try and do a gig with someone or catch up with, people that you really want to, sustain a relationship with, after you come back. Really make an effort to catch up with them and see them face to face, because that can make all the difference in the world. So it's just something, again, to be conscious of about heading out on a long-term tour. You do really have to make a conscious effort to maintain the relationships with people back home. Now, the fourth point that I want to talk about is something that kind of ties onto the back of what I was just discussing, and that was that if you're out on tour, especially for an extended period of time, you're going to miss occasions at home. That's just a reality. Birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, any kind of celebration, if it's obvious, if you're not there, you're not going to be able to be a part of that. Now, the thing that really magnifies the impact of that sensation is that when you start to miss the same occasions year after year after year after year, the fourth or fifth year of missing your parents' birthday, or, you have another sibling that gets married and you miss it again, it's all stuff that, people can be accepting of you being away. When you're heading out on tour, yes, it's a reality. You're not going to be there for some things. But when you do start to miss these occasions, year after year, it can change how you even think about these occasions. As I said before, you end up kind of numbing yourself to these things that in the real world, if you were back home, that would be big things, big celebrations and things you should be really happy about. But when you're on the other side of that, and you see pictures of, someone's birthday party or someone's engagement party or things like that, and you're not a part of it, sometimes it starts to change the way that you perceive that kind of thing. And it's also important to remember that you being away can be perceived by people as you not caring about these occasions, which, the majority of the time is the last thing you want. Of course you care about the people back home and your family and friends, celebrations, but when you're not physically there, that can be perceived by some people as you just being a little bit blasé to their lives. So it's just really important to know that that's a reality. As I said, for me, this has been almost 14 years. So that's, 14 of my dad's birthdays that I've missed, and, close to 14 Christmases that our family hasn't all been together. If you're someone who's very family focused and very much, ingrained in your social network of friends, and you get offered a long-term touring gig, it's just something to be aware of. Like, a lot of that stuff is going to change, and you just have to be prepared for that. On the perception side of things, as I said, people thinking that you don't care about them or don't care about their celebrations, it's just very important to try and do everything you can to remind them that you do, whether that is, sending flowers or, making a conscious effort to call people on their birthdays, that kind of thing can go a long way in just reminding yourself that there is a world outside of this touring world with, real family and friends that have real, big occasions and celebrations that, otherwise you would be a part of. So just be aware of that kind of thing. It's really important, but over a long period of time, it can definitely take a toll on you. So you just have to be ready to tackle that when those things come up to the best that you can. Now, the last point that I want to talk about today when we're discussing, being on tour for a long period of time is that you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now, what I mean by that is that you have to be adaptable, in terms of your living style. You have to be good at sleeping in foreign spaces, being okay with not knowing where to get the best coffee, not knowing where the supermarket is, not knowing where the laundromat is, depending on where you are, not being able to speak the language and understand the street signs and all of that kind of stuff. That's something that you do over time get better at, but it can be a shock when you come out on tour for the first time and you're very used to having your routine of things at home and all of the nice things that make you feel comfortable in your home space. You get out on the road and realize that you don't have any of that. It can be a shock, and especially if you're, week 1 or 2 into a 2-year tour and realize like you're going to be changing environments potentially every, night or every week or every month. It can be a little bit jarring to adapt to that. So just be aware that it is, a muscle that you can train, just being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I by no means want to sound like a spoiled child, but, when you're living in a hotel, it can be the nicest hotel in the world. But if it's a single bed, windows that don't open, small fridge, no kitchen, it can be a tough space to live in for a long period of time. For me, over my time of touring, I've realized that there are, a few specific things that I bring with me and that I set up in whatever room that I'm in to make it feel homely and comfortable. And for me, that's things like a portable speaker, my coffee maker, some pictures from home, my laptop, obviously, to communicate with people and work on music. But, that really changes person to person. I know people that are on this current tour that tour with so much stuff from home just to try and make them feel like they're in their, usual, comfortable, homely environment. Things like kitchen accessories and blankets and pillows and artwork and everything. They end up traveling with so much stuff just to give themselves the feeling of being comfortable and home-based. But it can be difficult to achieve that. And if you are someone, as mentioned, who's very used to having their nice things and their comfortable routine at home, coming out on tour, it can be a challenge to adapt to the way of life that it is like this. Like all of these points, just being aware of them before you actually get into this routine can be really helpful, I think. Just knowing that when you come out on the road, it's going to be different to home. You're not going to have your bed. That's a fact, But some people don't really think about that stuff until they actually get out on the road and realize like, oh yeah, this bed is not like mine, or, this coffee is not as good as my local barista, or things like that. That's the reality of touring. And for me, that's something that's really exciting and I enjoy about it. Like a lot of people don't like that. They just do everything they can to make the touring environment and their room like home. And, that's great. If that's what they need to give their best every day, all power to them. But for me, I've found that when I've tried to do that in the past, I've just been more frustrated because then it's gone down the rabbit hole of like, well, if I have this, then I should have this, and then I should have this, and this. And you end up traveling with so much stuff to try and make yourself feel comfortable, rather than just embracing the fact that when you're out on tour, it's going to be different. If you're more open to that fact and that reality, I feel like you're going to have a much better time when you're touring over a long period of time. So that's it for today. I really hope you've enjoyed checking out this video of the top 5 things that I've found to be the most challenging about touring long term. Now, there are obviously a lot of other challenges that come with this type of gig, but it has to be said that there are so many positives about long-term touring as well. And the reality is that if there weren't more positives than negatives, then no one would be doing this kind of work. I just really hope that this video has been useful and informative for someone who is potentially heading out on the road to hopefully lessen that shock of what some of the realities are of a gig like this. But I'd also really love to hear from you. Are you someone who's been out on the road for an extended period of time and come up against challenges and surprises that you weren't necessarily expecting? How did you help fix that and help you, enjoy the experience to the absolute fullest? Please put it in the comments below. I'd really love to read it, and I know that there's a lot of other people out there that would find that information super useful and valuable as well. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Please head to drummersperspective.com, sign up to the mailing list, and I'll see you next time on Drummers Perspective.